The millionaire accidentally hugs a strange woman at the airport and finds true love. Richard Montgomery's mind was a fortress of calculated precision as he navigated the polished corridors of Logan International Airport. At 38, the weight of past betrayals had sculpted him into a man who trusted only the cold, unmistakable language of numbers and subtle cues. Yet on this brisk autumn afternoon, amidst the flurry of high society and hurried business travelers, fate had other plans. Expecting his sister to join him for a brief family reunion, a rare pause from the relentless demands of venture capital, the CEO moved with measured purpose. His tailored navy suit and pristine shoes mirrored an image of success, yet beneath the polished exterior lay a heart battered by deceit. Every handshake had once been tinged with suspicion, every smile scrutinized for a hint of ulterior motive. Trust, he'd learned, was a commodity too precious to squander. As he rounded a corner near a gleaming information kiosk, Richard's mind was preoccupied with the day's meetings and the nagging memories of past gold-digger encounters. In that fleeting moment, he mistook the figure ahead, a woman with a quiet yet compelling presence, for his sister. Without a second thought, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her in an impulsive, affectionate embrace, a greeting born of habit and familial expectation. The contact was immediate and electric. For a heartbeat, time stuttered. Richard's instinctive warmth was met with an unexpected chill as he realized his error. The woman's delicate frame stiffened under his arms, her eyes wide with surprise and something unreadable, a mix of apprehension and guarded sorrow. His mind raced. "Who are you? What have I done?" The taste of regret was bitter on his tongue as he released her, stepping back with a mortified apology. "Forgive me. I must have mistaken you for my sister," he stammered, his voice low and laced with genuine remorse. Yet even as the words left his lips, a peculiar sensation lingered, a spark of connection that neither could fully dismiss. The brief embrace had unlocked something within him, a glimmer of hope, an inexplicable pull toward the enigmatic stranger before him. Her name, as he would soon learn, was Elena Kovač, a woman whose unassuming grace belied the hardships etched into her every line. As Richard's eyes searched hers for forgiveness, he couldn't help but notice the subtle details, the way her fingers trembled slightly, the soft interplay of light and shadow on her face, and the hint of melancholy in her gaze. It was as though her discomfort with the trappings of wealth and polished surroundings shone through, setting her apart from the many he encountered daily. For a long, suspended moment, the bustling airport seemed to fade into the background. Richard's internal monologue thundered. Could it be that this unplanned encounter is more than mere mistake? Am I seeing something genuine in her eyes? A vulnerability that mirrors my own guarded heart? Such thoughts, uncharacteristic of his usual rationality, sent an unsettling shiver down his spine. Before any further words could be exchanged, the ambient hum of the airport intruded. Announcements over the intercom, the rolling of luggage and the murmur of voices carrying snippets of conversation. Elena's expression, however, remained etched in his mind. A silent question, a challenge, perhaps even a plea for understanding. And in that silent communication, Richard sensed the start of a story that defied the transactional nature of his past relationships. Struggling to regain composure, he offered a final, tentative smile. "I'm truly sorry for the confusion," he repeated, his voice a mix of earnest regret and an undercurrent of something more. A spark of hope, perhaps, that this moment was not entirely accidental. Elena's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flickering with caution as she nodded in acknowledgement, leaving him with a lingering uncertainty. Was her guarded demeanor merely a mask or a shield forged by life's harsher truths? If this story has touched your heart so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's free, as your support helps us create more meaningful stories for you. As he walked away, Richard's thoughts churned. He had built his life on reading people, The subtle twitch of an eyebrow, the fleeting look in a distant gaze, and, in that split second, he had detected something inexplicably sincere in Elena. A detail in the way her eyes softened when she looked away, the faint crease of worry on her forehead. Each spoke volumes, even as they raised new questions. Who is she, really? And what is it that she's hiding? These questions began to form the early threads of an investigation that he could not ignore. Richard's best friend and confidant, Thomas, had warned him countless times. Not everyone who shows vulnerability is genuine, Richard. Sometimes it's just a well-practiced act to get what you want. And yet, as he replayed the accidental embrace in his mind, Richard wondered if perhaps he was at a crossroads. Could this be the moment when he finally allowed himself to believe in something authentic, despite the risks of being used for his wealth again? The sound of a boarding call snapped him back to reality. The terminal, with its chaotic symphony of departures and arrivals, reminded him that life, much like business, was a series of calculated risks. But as he stood there amid the clamor of transient souls, one thought remained unyielding. The warmth of that mistaken hug had stirred emotions long locked away by years of hardened judgment. Before Richard could decide whether to pursue this unforeseen connection, the scene around him shifted. A sudden commotion near the departure gate, a cascade of voices raised in alarm, left him frozen in anticipation. Could this be another twist of fate, or merely a distraction? The question hung in the air, as potent as the unresolved mystery of Elena's true self. And so, with his heart pounding and his mind awash with conflicting emotions, Richard Montgomery found himself at a precipice. The accidental embrace had ignited a spark of genuine connection, yet it also ushered in a torrent of doubts, questions about trust, authenticity, and the peril of allowing vulnerability to seep into a life built on guarded strength. With every calculated detail of Elena's appearance etched into his memory, he vowed to uncover the truth behind her quiet resilience, even if it meant confronting the very insecurities that had long defined him. What secrets lie beneath the surface of that enigmatic gaze? The thought echoed in his mind, leaving him teetering between hope and caution. In that moment, as the lights of the airport glimmered like beacons of both opportunity and peril, Richard Montgomery knew that his carefully constructed world was about to be irrevocably altered. After the echo of that unintended embrace faded into the hum of the airport, Richard found himself alone with the relentless cadence of his thoughts. Back in the quiet solitude of his hotel room, he sat at a sleek, dark desk, a single lamp casting elongated shadows on the polished wood. The memory of Elena's eyes, wide with a quiet storm of apprehension and something more tender, persisted like an uninvited refrain. He flipped open a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with meticulous observations, and began to record every detail that had marked that brief, fateful moment. Her eyes, he noted in careful script, a soft glimmer of sadness mixed with cautious defiance. Her attire was modest. No designer label could hide the wear of hard work, but there was a subtle elegance in the way she carried herself, as if every movement was deliberate and meaningful. His mind, trained by years of dissecting the unspoken language of business deals, was now at work, piecing together the puzzle of Elena's character. Richard's internal monologue was a battleground of logic and vulnerability. Why did I feel that spark? He wondered, his thoughts echoing against the walls of his guarded heart. The answer was elusive, a murmur of hope amid the dissonance of past betrayals. He recalled the lingering hesitation in her eyes as he apologized, the silent question that hovered between them like fragile glass. Who is she, truly? It was a question that demanded answers, even as it stirred memories of every time he had been used, every moment of calculated deception that had left him scarred. Determined to uncover the truth behind that enigmatic encounter, Richard resolved to observe Elena from afar. In the coming days, he would rely on his most trusted asset, his acute ability to read people through minute details, to piece together the mosaic of her life. He wasn't naive. His experiences had taught him that vulnerability was often cloaked in layers of artifice. And yet, something about Elena whispered of authenticity, a rarity in a world where intentions were frequently veiled in pretense. The following morning, Richard found himself once again at Logan International Airport, not as a departing executive, but as an inquisitor seeking fragments of a story that had ignited his curiosity. He recalled Elena's graceful yet reserved manner as she moved through the terminal, her presence subtle but unmistakable. From a discreet vantage point near a bustling cafe, he watched as she interacted with those around her. There was a quiet kindness in the way she exchanged a few words with a nervous elderly traveler, and the compassionate smile she offered a young child clutching a battered toy. These fleeting moments, unnoticed by most, were etched deeply into his consciousness. The sensory details of that morning played out like a cinematic reel before him, the scent of fresh pastries mingling with the sharper tang of coffee, the warm murmur of casual conversation juxtaposed against the sterile coolness of polished floors and glass walls. Every detail seemed imbued with a deeper significance, as if the universe itself were conspiring to reveal hidden truths about Elena's character. Richard's eyes, trained to catch the slightest tremor in a gesture or the faintest quaver in a voice, began to assemble a portrait of a woman who was far more complex than the world might assume. During a brief pause in his observation, Richard stepped aside to speak with Thomas, his longtime confidant and friend. In the quiet alcove of a stylish airport lounge, Thomas's tone was measured, yet laced with the familiar caution that had served him well in the past. "You're not one to chase shadows, Richard," Thomas said, his gaze steady. "But if you believe there's more to her story, you need to trust your instincts, and also be prepared for what they might reveal." Richard absorbed Thomas's words with a nod, feeling both the weight of his past and the glimmer of a future that might be different. "I know the risks," he replied, his voice low and resolute. "But what if this time the vulnerability I see isn't a mask? What if it's an invitation to something real?" Thomas's eyes flickered with concern, but he said nothing further, leaving Richard to wrestle with the delicate balance between hope and the scars of mistrust. Later that day, while perusing the terminal's quiet corridors, Richard noticed a detail that made his pulse quicken. Near one of the lesser-used service areas, a narrow hallway that led to a restricted office wing, he glimpsed a figure in motion. It was Elena, unmistakably, as she moved with purposeful grace. Something about the scene caught his attention. The subtle tension in her posture as she paused outside an office door, the way she seemed to take a deep breath before disappearing inside. In that fleeting moment, Richard's mind raced with possibilities. Was she here on purpose, or was it mere coincidence? Every instinct screamed that this was no accident. His internal dialogue, usually so precise and controlled, roiled with a blend of excitement and apprehension. Could this be the clue that confirms my suspicions? He wondered, his thoughts racing faster than the airport's digital clock could keep pace. He decided to follow at a discreet distance, determined to gather the information he needed without revealing his own presence. The thrill of the chase, the allure of uncovering hidden truths, propelled him forward. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors with the stealth of a seasoned negotiator, Richard's mind catalogued each observation, the gentle way Elena moved, the quiet focus in her eyes as she went about her task, and the soft murmur of determination in her measured steps. The contrast between the sterile corporate environment and the raw, unfiltered reality of her existence was stark. It was as though two worlds collided within the same space, a world defined by wealth and status, and another by quiet resilience and secret sacrifice. For a moment, Richard paused at a doorway, his heart pounding in tandem with the rhythmic hum of an air conditioning unit overhead. Here, in the dim light of a nearly empty office, he sensed the presence of a story waiting to be told, a story of dignity in the face of desperation, of authenticity that defied the transactional nature of his world. Is this the evidence I need, or am I simply projecting my own hopes onto a woman who might be hiding a painful truth? The question, both tantalizing and dangerous, lingered in the charged silence. As he lingered in the shadows, Richard wrestled with his own prejudices and the ghosts of past betrayals. Every detail, every subtle nuance of Elena's actions challenged the hardened shell he had built around his heart. He realized that while his instincts had often saved him from being used, they had also isolated him from the possibility of genuine connection. And now, as he observed Elena, a woman whose every gesture spoke of a complex interplay between strength and vulnerability, he felt the stirrings of a transformation he had long resisted. Before Richard could draw any definitive conclusions, a sudden murmur of voices echoed from further down the corridor, accompanied by the soft clatter of footsteps. The moment hung in the air, thick with anticipation. What new layer of truth is about to be revealed, he wondered, his pulse quickening as he prepared to follow the unfolding scene. With his heart and mind now fully engaged, Richard Montgomery knew that every decision from this point forward would be laced with risk and potential reward. The mistaken embrace had been only the beginning, a spark that had ignited a flame of inquiry into a world where trust was both a rare commodity and a dangerous vulnerability. As he moved to intercept the next chapter of Elena's story, he carried with him the lingering question: is genuine connection worth the inevitable risks of being exposed? Late that night, after the terminal had quieted to a murmur, Richard found himself alone in the vast corridors of his own domain, a modern, glass-encased office block adjacent to Logan International. The city's pulse had dimmed to a gentle throb, and the ambient glow of streetlights cast elongated shadows across the polished floors. He had retreated to his office to review the day's events, yet his mind was restless, replaying the accidental embrace and the subtle nuances of Elena's reaction. The office, usually a sanctuary of order and precision, now felt like a stage set for secrets. Richard's eyes, ever vigilant and trained to decipher the unspoken, caught a whisper of movement, a slight, almost imperceptible rustle echoing in the silence. At first, he dismissed it as a trick of the mind, a lingering residue from the day's unexpected encounter. But then the sound came again, a soft, deliberate tread along the corridor outside his office. Curiosity kindled within him. He rose from behind his desk, his heart beating with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. As he approached the slightly ajar door leading to his private workspace, the muted hum of fluorescent lights and the gentle pitter-patter of footsteps grew louder, more insistent. There, in the half-light of a solitary desk lamp and the silvery glow of moonlight filtering through tall windows, he caught sight of a figure. It was Elena. Her silhouette moved with a quiet, methodical grace, her form illuminated by the soft gleam of polished surfaces. Richard watched, transfixed, as she went about cleaning the office with meticulous care, dusting the chrome edges of sleek furniture, carefully wiping the glass panels that reflected the city's nocturnal skyline. Every motion was deliberate, almost reverential, as though she were preserving not just the physical space but the dignity it represented. Richard's mind raced. What is she doing here at this hour? The familiar instincts he'd honed over years of business negotiations urged him to search for hidden motives, a sign of deceit, of manipulation. Yet, as he observed her delicate, trembling hands and the faint crease of sorrow in her eyes, a different truth began to take shape. Elena was not here to exploit him, nor was she acting out of greed. There was a quiet desperation, a tender resilience in the way she performed these tasks, a stark contrast to the calculated world he navigated daily. Every detail spoke volumes. The soft swish of her cleaning cloth, the muted clatter of a dropped cleaning bottle, even the way she paused occasionally as if listening to a distant, unspoken memory. All of it wove a portrait of a woman burdened by life's hardships yet determined to maintain a semblance of order in a chaotic world. Richard's finely tuned senses noted the subtle tremor in her fingers and the way the lamp's glow caught a single tear glistening on her cheek before she hastily brushed it away. His internal dialogue churned with conflicting emotions. I've always prided myself on reading people, the micro-expressions, the fleeting hesitations, but what if my instincts have been clouded by my own fears? The very thought was both unnerving and exhilarating. For years he had built impenetrable walls around his heart, convinced that vulnerability was a luxury he could ill afford. Yet here, in the quiet intimacy of this midnight revelation, he sensed something genuine emerging from the shadows. Richard lingered in the doorway, torn between the desire to confront her and the need to protect the fragile clarity that was slowly emerging within him. His analytical mind catalogued every nuance. The way her eyes, momentarily illuminated by the soft light, revealed an unexpected depth of compassion, the care with which she handled even the most mundane task, the subtle defiance etched in the set of her jaw. In that silent hour, the image of Elena transformed from the accidental stranger of a mistaken embrace into a symbol of quiet resilience and unspoken sacrifice. A part of him yearned to step forward, to ask her why she was here, what compelled her to seek refuge in a place that, to many, symbolized power and privilege. But another, more cautious part urged restraint. I cannot let my own insecurities drive me to an impulsive confrontation, he reasoned. Instead, he retreated slowly, melding into the shadows of the corridor to observe without being seen. Every step he took was measured, his pulse a steady counterpoint to the soft ticking of the wall clock. The thrill of the discovery, tinged with the risk of unearthing painful truths, fueled his determination to learn more before his carefully guarded heart allowed itself to be exposed. The scene before him unfolded like a silent film. Each movement, each soft sound, was laden with meaning. As Elena continued her work, the raw vulnerability of the moment struck Richard with unexpected force. Here was a woman who had clearly weathered storms he'd only ever read about in cautionary tales. She was far from the stereotypical opportunist his world often warned him about. Instead, her every action whispered of quiet defiance against a system that had long dismissed her worth. Yet, amid this burgeoning clarity, a lingering question gnawed at him. Was her presence here simply a matter of circumstance, a safe haven born of necessity, or did it hint at a deeper connection, one that defied the superficial transactions of his corporate life? The thought was as compelling as it was dangerous. To let himself be drawn into her orbit was to risk everything he had built, to expose vulnerabilities he had long concealed behind an impenetrable facade. Richard's eyes roamed the room once more, taking in the soft interplay of light and shadow, the subtle imperfections that rendered the sterile office unexpectedly human. The cleaning supplies lay neatly arranged, each item a silent witness to Elena's quiet struggle. In that intimate tableau, he felt an overwhelming urge to understand her story, beyond the surface of a mistaken embrace, beyond the whispers of suspicion that had haunted him since their first encounter. As the minutes stretched into an eternity, Richard's resolve began to solidify. He would not let fear or the scars of past betrayals dictate his future. This discovery, unsettling as it was, offered a rare glimpse into a truth that was untainted by the cynicism of wealth and power, a truth that resonated with his deepest yearning for genuine connection. Before dawn's light crept in to wash away the darkness, Richard made a silent vow. He would return in the coming days, not as a wary observer, but as a man ready to engage with the delicate complexities of a soul he was only beginning to understand. He would seek out Elena, not to expose her vulnerabilities or cast judgment, but to unravel the quiet mystery of her existence, a mystery that, if embraced, might redefine the very nature of trust in his life. With his mind swirling in a haze of newfound determination and lingering doubts, Richard retreated to his study. The memory of Elena's midnight silhouette would remain etched in his thoughts, a beacon guiding him through the murky waters of his own guarded heart. Can I truly risk letting someone in when every instinct warns of betrayal? he wondered silently. Yet, even as that question echoed in the stillness of the early hours, a fragile hope began to blossom within him, a hope that the unexpected discovery of one humble act might lead him to the genuine connection he had long yearned for. And so, as the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in soft pastels, Richard Montgomery closed his eyes, allowing the weight of the night's revelations to settle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps the opportunity to finally bridge the gap between suspicion and trust. For now, in the quiet intimacy of his solitude, he clung to the belief that true understanding and love could only be found in embracing the vulnerability of an honest, unvarnished truth. The following morning, the brisk Boston air carried a quiet promise of clarity. Richard Montgomery, still haunted by the revelations of the midnight encounter, returned to Logan International with a renewed sense of purpose. Determined to peel back the layers of Elena's guarded world, he resolved to observe her in the unfiltered light of day, a time when vulnerability could not hide behind the anonymity of night. From his usual vantage point near an artfully appointed cafe within the terminal, Richard watched as the flow of travelers surged past. The rhythmic tapping of shoes on polished tiles, the soft murmur of casual greetings, and the faint scent of espresso blended into an urban symphony. Yet amid this everyday bustle, one figure remained a subtle, constant presence. Elena. In a quiet alcove near a row of departure gates, Elena moved with an understated grace that belied the hardships etched upon her features. Richard's keen eyes noticed the gentle way she interacted with those around her. A frail, elderly man struggling with heavy luggage, a disoriented young mother seeking reassurance, a business traveler whose hurried glance softened under her kind smile. Each interaction was a study in empathy. Her gestures, though simple, a comforting pat on the back, a whispered word of encouragement, carried the weight of genuine concern. "Is this the same woman I observed in the dim glow of midnight?" Richard mused, his inner voice mingling with the ambient clatter of the airport. Every detail was catalogued with precision: the way her eyes crinkled in sincere laughter, the softness of her touch, the compassionate tilt of her head as if she carried not just burdens, but a quiet determination to ease others' pain. The stark contrast between the harshness of corporate boardrooms and the tenderness radiating from her seemed almost too poetic to be mere coincidence. Unable to contain his curiosity, Richard found himself drifting toward a quiet corner where he could speak with Thomas. In the hushed enclave of an upscale lounge, the soft hum of subdued conversations provided a fragile shield against the prying noise of the terminal. "Thomas," Richard began, his tone low and measured, "there's something about Elena that troubles me, and yet it compels me. I witnessed her today, and her kindness. It doesn't match the image I expected." He leaned forward, the dim light catching the vulnerability in his eyes, a rarity for a man accustomed to control. Thomas studied him for a moment before replying. "Richard, your instincts have served you well over the years, but sometimes the truth isn't hidden in the obvious details. Look deeper. People wear masks, but their actions, especially in quiet moments, betray their true selves." His voice was gentle yet firm, echoing the years of shared confidences and hard-earned lessons. As if in response, Richard recalled a scene that had unfolded just moments before. Near the boarding gate, an elderly woman in a faded coat had struggled with a suitcase. Without hesitation, Elena had stepped forward, offering both assistance and a warm smile that seemed to momentarily bridge the gap between two disparate worlds. The kindness was unassuming, yet it resonated deeply with the man who had long dismissed such gestures as mere niceties in a world of calculated transactions. Could it be that her apparent discrepancies, those subtle hints of vulnerability, are not deceit at all, but markers of a life lived with quiet honor? He wondered, his thoughts oscillating between guarded skepticism and a nascent hope that dared to challenge his long-held mistrust. Driven by these reflections, Richard discreetly trailed her as she moved through the terminal. His footsteps, careful and silent, followed her shadow-like figure. The airport, with its high ceilings and sprawling glass walls, transformed into a labyrinth of secrets where every corridor whispered hidden truths. Elena's route led her toward a service area tucked away from the public eye, a space where the controlled chaos of the terminal gave way to moments of private labor. In a modest break room behind a cluster of maintenance offices, Elena knelt beside a counter cluttered with scattered documents and a half-empty cup of coffee. Her face, illuminated by the soft morning light streaming through a narrow window, bore the quiet resolve of someone who had weathered many storms. For a moment, she allowed herself a brief reprieve, a deep, shuddering breath that betrayed the toll of unspoken burdens. Richard's mind raced. Every detail here is a brushstroke painting a portrait of resilience. Not a facade designed to exploit wealth, but a woman fighting her own battles with dignity. He noted the slight tremor in her hands as she meticulously organized the scattered papers, the care with which she cleaned up a spilled drop of coffee as if it were a stain on her very soul. Yet even as the evidence of her sincerity accumulated, a question continued to gnaw at him. What secret does she guard so fiercely that she must hide behind a veil of modesty and routine? The mystery was as compelling as it was dangerous, a challenge to his own preconceived notions about people and trust. With each observed gesture, his heart both ached and ached with the possibility that he had misjudged her nature entirely. A sudden interruption shattered his reverie. Over the gentle din of the terminal, a commotion arose near the entrance of the break room. Richard's pulse quickened. He edged closer to the doorway, his presence masked by the ebb and flow of passing travelers. Through the frosted glass he saw Elena stand abruptly, her eyes flashing with a mix of alarm and resolve. It was as if she had sensed an intrusion. Whether from an unseen threat or the weight of her own hidden burdens, he could not tell. Before he could piece together the scene, the noise subsided, leaving behind a charged silence. The brief flash of her reaction, the silent question in her eyes, left Richard reeling. What could have startled her? Is there something else lurking in her story that I have yet to uncover? The thought sparked a new urgency within him. Richard's internal dialogue became a cacophony of caution and desire. Caution born from years of betrayal and desire for a connection that transcended his cold calculations. He resolved to let this moment pass for now, unwilling to rush into confrontation without gathering every possible detail. Instead, he retreated slowly, his mind swirling with the implications of her behavior. Was this an isolated incident, or evidence of a deeper turmoil that she had long concealed? Returning to his seat in the lounge, Richard allowed himself a moment to breathe and recalibrate. The day's observations had deepened the enigma of Elena. Her compassionate acts illuminated a truth that defied the superficial judgments of wealth and status. And yet, the fleeting moment of alarm in the break room hinted at a hidden complexity, a shadow of danger or perhaps regret that he could not yet decipher. As the morning progressed, the interplay of light and shadow in the terminal mirrored the duality of his own heart, a desire to trust, tempered by the scars of past deceptions. With every passing minute, Richard's resolve grew stronger. He would not let his distrust, hardened by experience, obscure the possibility that genuine connection might be found in the most unexpected of places. Before he departed the airport that day, Richard made a silent promise to himself. He would seek out Elena when the moment was right, ready to confront the questions that now loomed large in his mind. In the meantime, he would gather the fragments of her story, piecing together the mosaic of her life with the same meticulous care he reserved for business deals. Only then could he decide whether the warmth of that accidental embrace and the quiet compassion she exhibited were genuine invitations to love, or merely the echoes of a life marked by hardship and sorrow. What will I find when I finally dare to bridge the gap between suspicion and trust? The question lingered as he stepped into the cool afternoon, leaving behind the confines of the terminal and the safety of his observations, and venturing into a future where every heartbeat carried the weight of both hope and uncertainty. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton in Boston shimmered beneath a cascade of crystal chandeliers, their light refracting into 1,000 dancing prisms across polished marble floors. Tonight, the gala was a tapestry of refined elegance and hushed whispers, where high society mingled under the weight of unspoken expectations. Richard Montgomery moved through the crowd like a cautious observer, his tailored suit impeccable, his gaze ever alert despite the celebratory air. Every detail of the ornate surroundings, the soft strains of a live quartet, the clink of champagne glasses, the muted laughter, served as both a distraction and a reminder of the life he'd meticulously built. Yet, beneath the refined veneer, Richard's heart thumped with disquiet. His thoughts kept returning to Elena, the enigmatic woman whose accidental embrace and subsequent quiet presence had unsettled his guarded world. Tonight, fate had orchestrated their paths to converge once more in a setting where secrets were as dangerous as currency. Across the room, near a display of modern art and shimmering floral arrangements, Richard spotted her. Elena stood slightly apart from the clusters of affluent guests, her posture dignified but marked by an unmistakable tension. The soft glow of the ambient lighting caught the subtle lines of worry etched on her face, a quiet testimony to burdens she bore silently. Richard's pulse quickened as he noted the faint glisten of unshed tears in her eyes, quickly hidden behind a practiced smile. It was a smile that spoke of resilience, yet hinted at hidden pain. As he drew closer, conversation swirled around him like a gentle current, but Richard's mind was fixed solely on her. Is she here willingly, or has she been drawn into this world by forces beyond her control? He wondered. His internal dialogue was a mixture of admiration and trepidation, each thought laced with the memories of past betrayals and the promise of something real. Every detail of her, down to the soft curl of her hair that escaped a loosely pinned bun, seemed to tell a story of quiet defiance against a world that demanded conformity. The moment of uneasy calm was shattered by an unexpected commotion near the entrance of the ballroom. A hush fell over a nearby group of guests as a striking woman in distress was ushered in, flanked by aides and security. The newcomer was Marina, Elena's younger sister, the very person whose fragile health had haunted Elena's every step. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown that seemed out of place among the opulent finery, Marina's pallor and labored breathing immediately set the stage for what was to come. A murmur rippled through the room as guests exchanged glances. Richard's eyes locked onto Elena, whose face had drained of color. In that split second, he saw the raw vulnerability and heartbreak in her expression, a silent confession that the truth could no longer remain hidden. Could this be the moment that shatters every carefully constructed illusion? He thought, a knot of apprehension tightening in his chest. The arrival of Marina created a ripple of tension. A well-dressed man in the crowd, emboldened by a mixture of curiosity and self-importance, stepped forward. "Elena, care to explain why your sister is here in such a state?" he demanded, his tone both accusatory and condescending. His words cut through the ambient noise like a knife, drawing the eyes of everyone present. Elena's composure faltered. The room, once a stage for silent elegance, now buzzed with charged whispers and speculative stares. Her eyes flickered with a mixture of shame and fierce protectiveness as she attempted to deflect the inquiry. "There is nothing to explain," she replied, her voice trembling yet determined. "Marina. She needed help, and I'm doing all I can." Richard felt his heart twist painfully. In that charged moment, the layers of his own misgivings collided with the undeniable authenticity in Elena's eyes. He recalled every subtle gesture, every whispered kindness she had shown throughout his days of quiet observation, each a piece of a puzzle that now demanded recognition. Despite the accusations and the spotlight, one truth shone with clarity. Elena had never once asked for his money, nor had she sought to exploit his world. Instead, her dignity remained intact, even as her struggles became public spectacle. In the ensuing chaos, voices rose in a dissonant mix of sympathy and judgment. A servant hurried past, balancing a tray of refreshments, while a distinguished guest murmured, "How can a woman in her position maintain such pride?" The questions stung, but they were also a mirror reflecting Richard's own battles with trust. For years he had clung to his cynicism as armor, afraid that any softening of his stance would leave him exposed to manipulation. Yet now, as he observed the unyielding courage in Elena's eyes, his defenses began to crumble. "Please," Elena interjected, her voice carrying both desperation and resolve, "I have done nothing to compromise my integrity. Marina's condition, this crisis, has tested me in ways that money could never mend." Her words, though softly spoken, reverberated through the hall. The accusation that she was here for his wealth dissolved under the weight of her sincerity. Richard's inner turmoil deepened. Is my fear of being used simply a remnant of old wounds, or is it a rational shield against future heartbreak? He mused, feeling the gravity of the moment pressing upon him. In the charged silence that followed, he took a tentative step forward, his presence unnoticed amid the storm of whispers. His mind raced. The evidence before him painted a portrait of a woman who had weathered the storm with grace, whose actions were driven by love and sacrifice, not by a hunger for wealth. Before he could act, a sudden cry shattered the fragile calm. Marina, her condition worsening, collapsed near the foot of a grand staircase. The shock of the incident sent a collective gasp through the assembled guests. Richard's heart pounded as he rushed toward the commotion, each step echoing like a beat in a silent drum. Elena's eyes met his from across the room, filled with a silent plea for understanding, a desperate hope that he might see beyond the scandal and recognize the truth of her sacrifice. In that harrowing moment, as aides swarmed to attend to Marina, Richard was confronted with the stark reality of his own internal divide. His lifelong distrust warred with the undeniable connection he felt with Elena. Do I let fear dictate my judgment, or do I risk everything for the possibility of genuine love? He asked himself, his inner voice both fragile and resolute. Richard's gaze lingered on Elena, who now knelt beside her fallen sister, her face a portrait of anguish and quiet strength. The realization struck him with piercing clarity. True connection was never about the transaction of wealth. It was about the shared vulnerability that blossomed in the face of adversity. In that moment, his guarded heart began to open, accepting the risk that comes with trusting another soul. A hushed murmur of concern and sympathy spread through the crowd as emergency services were summoned. The gala, once a showcase of opulence, transformed into a crucible of raw, human emotion. Richard's mind whirled with conflicting impulses, duty, compassion, and the sudden fierce desire to protect both women from a world that had long misunderstood them. Standing at the periphery of the unfolding drama, Richard vowed to confront his own prejudices. The scandalous whispers and piercing stares of the elite were now inconsequential compared to the undeniable truth before him. Elena's dignity and the quiet, unyielding love she bore for her sister shone brighter than any glittering facade. Could I dare to believe that vulnerability is not a weakness, but the gateway to something profoundly real? The question reverberated through his soul as he steadied himself amidst the chaos, preparing to step into the fray and offer what help he could. It was a decision that could either mend the fractured pieces of his heart or plunge him deeper into the fears he'd spent years cultivating. As the room buzzed with the urgency of medical aid and hushed condolences, Richard Montgomery felt the weight of the moment settle upon him. Tonight, in the midst of scandal and heartbreak, he was forced to choose: cling to the old familiar armor of distrust, or embrace the perilous yet potentially transformative possibility of love. The answer, he knew, would redefine not only his future, but the very essence of his identity. And as the night deepened and Marina was whisked away for emergency care, one pressing question remained. Was the courage to trust worth the risk of being betrayed again? The morning after the gala dawned with a soft, diffused light that barely stirred the stillness of Boston's hospital corridors. Richard Montgomery found himself in a place he had long avoided, the sterile, quiet halls where hope and despair mingled in equal measure. The events of the previous night still echoed in his mind: the scandal, the public humiliation, and above all, the raw display of Elena's unyielding courage. Now, as he walked slowly along the polished floor of the hospital's waiting area, every step felt laden with the weight of his decisions. Inside a modest room overlooking a small garden, Marina lay recovering. The steady beep of a heart monitor punctuated the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional distant murmur of a nurse. Richard paused at the threshold, his eyes softening as he took in the fragile figure of the young woman who had unwittingly become the catalyst for so many revelations. In that quiet moment, his inner dialogue whispered, "This is not about wealth or exploitation. It's about life, raw, unpredictable, and achingly real." Across the room, Elena sat at a small table by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of lukewarm tea. The lines of worry on her face had softened in the tender light of morning, replaced by tentative hope mingled with regret. When her eyes met Richard's, there was a pause, a silent acknowledgement that everything had changed. "Richard," she began, her voice steady but fragile, "I never wanted any of this exposure, this hurt. I hid my struggles because I believed I had to protect my dignity. I was terrified that if I showed you the truth, you'd see me as a charity case rather than someone worthy of love." Richard stepped closer, his gaze gentle and unyielding. "Elena, I've spent years building walls to protect myself from being used, but last night, watching you with your sister, seeing the pride and sacrifice behind every action, I realized that your secrets weren't born from greed or manipulation. They were born from a need to survive with honor." His words trembled with sincerity, the remnants of his guarded heart finally softening in the face of her vulnerability. A long, weighted silence settled between them as the distant sound of footsteps and soft murmurs of hospital life wove around their conversation. Richard continued, "I'm not the man I used to be. I've learned that true trust means accepting the possibility of pain if it also brings the chance for something real. I see you, Elena, not just as the woman I accidentally embraced at the airport, but as someone who has fought every day with dignity, even when the odds were stacked against you." Elena's eyes shimmered with unspoken emotion. "I was afraid," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that my past, my poverty, would make me unworthy of your trust. But I never asked for your money, never wanted your pity. I only ever wanted to keep my sister safe and my pride intact." Richard's expression softened further, a tentative smile breaking through. "I've made my share of mistakes, trusting those who only saw my wealth. But now I see that vulnerability isn't a weakness. It's the very foundation of connection. Perhaps together, we can redefine what it means to be strong." Outside, the hospital garden beckoned with the promise of renewal, a quiet oasis of green amid the concrete and clinical whites. The gentle rustle of leaves in the morning breeze mirrored the stirring of new beginnings in both their hearts. As if on cue, a nurse entered to gently check on Marina, her caring presence a silent reminder that even in moments of crisis, compassion could flourish. Richard turned his gaze back to Elena. "I'd like to start over," he said, his tone laced with cautious optimism. "No grand gestures, no pretenses, just simple moments. Perhaps a quiet coffee date, a walk through the city. Moments where we can learn who we really are without the weight of our past mistakes." Elena's lips curved into a small, hopeful smile. "I'd like that," she replied. "I want to build something real, a connection not defined by wealth or deceit, but by honesty and mutual respect. I want to prove, not just to you but to myself, that I'm more than the circumstances that have held me back." In that moment, the echoes of the gala, The midnight discoveries and every fragment of suspicion melted into a singular clarity. Both knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. The scars of old betrayals, the cautious nature of their hearts, and the ever-present fear of vulnerability. Yet the spark ignited by a mistaken embrace had grown into a flame capable of illuminating the darkest corners of their lives. As Marina's condition stabilized and plans for her full recovery took shape, Richard and Elena slowly began to rebuild the fragile bridge between their worlds. Their first few meetings were humble, a shared cup of coffee at a small, unassuming cafe where the chatter of everyday life served as a comforting backdrop. With each conversation, they peeled back layers of guardedness and suspicion, revealing dreams, regrets, and a mutual desire for genuine connection. On one such afternoon, as they strolled along the historic streets of Boston, Elena confided in Richard about the years she had spent juggling multiple jobs, her pride and resourcefulness keeping her afloat amid adversity. "I learned early on that pride could be both my shield and my cage," she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I hid behind a facade because I was terrified that if I showed my true self I'd be seen as weak, or worse, used." Richard squeezed her hand gently. "And I've spent so long fearing that the people around me only loved me for what I had. But now I see that true strength comes from being vulnerable. Real connection isn't about what you possess, it's about who you are, and I want to know the real you." Their conversation flowed like a quiet river, each word and gesture deepening their understanding of one another. The simple exchanges, free of the glittering pretenses of high society, allowed them to discover that their differences were not obstacles but opportunities. Opportunities to grow, to heal, and to build a future where trust and love coexisted in perfect balance. In the weeks that followed, as Marina continued to recover and the echoes of the gala slowly faded into memory, Richard and Elena nurtured their newfound bond with patience and tenderness. Every shared laugh, every moment of silence filled with understanding, was a step toward healing wounds that had once seemed irreparable. And with each passing day, the walls around Richard's heart crumbled a little more, replaced by the steady, unyielding warmth of true intimacy. Standing together on a crisp evening as the city lights twinkled like distant stars, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought him here. "I used to think trust was a liability," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But you've shown me that taking a risk, opening up, letting someone in, is the only way to truly live." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of both surrender and hope. "And I've learned that authenticity isn't a weakness. It's the courage to face life as it is, and to love despite it all." As the night deepened, enveloping them in its quiet embrace, Richard and Elena understood that they had discovered something rare and precious, a love that existed not in spite of their vulnerabilities, but because of them. Their pasts, marred by betrayal and hardship, no longer defined them. Instead, they became the very reason for their resilience and capacity for compassion. In that tender moment of shared truth, the once impenetrable walls of guarded hearts gave way to a fragile yet powerful bridge of understanding. A bridge built on honesty, vulnerability, and the unwavering belief that true connection could conquer even the deepest scars. And as the stars bore silent witness to their promise, one question lingered softly in the cool night air. Could love, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by genuine trust, be enough to heal even the most wounded hearts? The answer, whispered in the quiet cadence of newfound hope, was a resounding yes. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in the power of love to break down walls and bridge any divide. Don't forget to comment your feedback and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of family, redemption, and the triumph of love over pride. Remember, it's never too late to change your story.